The following is a fictional story set in the American West of 1885. She had 12 cents in her coat pocket. 12 cents. A folded letter wrapped in oilcloth. And a horse named Willow, who had walked 4 days through country nobody bothered to name anymore. The wind came down off the Nevada ridges the way it always came down in October. Dry, mean, carrying the smell of pine that had gone cold in stoves nobody lit anymore. It pushed dust the whole length of a street that ended at a bank built of gray stone. In a town made of pine boards and forgotten promises. Her name was HALE. She was 20 years old, and every single person in Dry Creek Hollow had already decided who she was. Before she finished saying her last name out loud, she sat her horse at the head of the road for a long moment. Before she came in, just sat there, watching, the way a person watches a room before they step into it. When they have learned by hard practice that rooms are not neutral, that walls remember, that the air itself can turn against you if you carry the wrong name into it. But here is the question I want you to sit with tonight, before we ride any further into this story. What would you do if the only thing your family ever left you was a name that every stranger already spat out? Before you could speak it? Not land, not money, not a roof, just a name. Stay with me, because what this young woman found at the bottom of that gorge changed everything. Willow was tired. Her head hung low. Her flanks were streaked with the pale salt of 4 days' sweat that had dried and been sweated over again. She was a good horse, a patient horse, a dark bay mare with a white sock on her off hind foot, and a way of setting her feet down like she had already thought about it. Aloan leaned forward. She put her hand flat on the mare's neck. She felt the animal breathing. "All right," she said, soft, only to the horse. "We are going in." She did not say the next part out loud. The next part was this: that she had ridden 4 days on a piece of paper her grandfather had died holding. That everything she owned in the world was tied behind the cantle of a saddle. That she had 12 cents, and there was no 13-cent coming. She touched her coat where the letter lay. She felt the oilcloth crackle faintly under her palm. It was the sound of something being kept alive by refusal. Then she nudged Willow with her heels, and they came down the road together into Dry Creek Hollow, Nevada, on the last warm afternoon of October. In the year 1885, the town was not much of a town. A livery at the north end, a saloon on the left, its porch gone gray, a general store on the right, with a coffee sack propped in the doorway to keep the wind out, a church with a bell tower that leaned 2 degrees south, a graveyard fenced in wrought iron, rusted the color of dried blood, and at the far end of the street, set apart the way a judge is set apart from a jury, the bank, stone-faced, square-shouldered, built by somebody who had intended it to outlast everyone who would ever walk through its door. In a town of pine and tar paper, that stone said something. It said, "We do not expect to be forgiven." It said, "We do not expect to leave." Aloan tied Willow at the trough. She stepped down. Her knees took a moment to remember what they were for. She stood in the road, with one hand on the mare's warm neck, while the blood came back into her legs. A man on the saloon porch had his chair tipped against the wall. He watched her the way men in small towns watch anything that arrives. He waited until she had straightened, before he spat into the dust. Deliberate, like a man setting down a card. "You lost?" She did not move her hand off the horse. "No." He looked her up and down, took his time with it. Something moved across his mouth that was not a smile. Only the shape a smile leaves behind, when it has been gone a while. She turned. She crossed the street, and she felt his attention go with her the whole way. The way a shadow goes with a thing at noon, whether the thing wants it or not. The general store smelled of coffee beans, lamp oil, wet leather, and the faintly sweet dust of dry goods stacked in the dark. A woman stood behind the counter in a gray apron, sleeves pushed to the elbow. She was counting nails into a paper twist with the concentration of somebody who had counted a great many things in her life, most of them about other people. She did not look up when the bell over the door went. Merritt Beale had run that store for 23 years. She had sold flour to men who were now in the churchyard. She had a way of measuring silence that told you exactly how much a thing was going to cost you. Aloan walked to the counter. She set a coin down on the wood. It was a dime. It was the last of what she had that would buy anything. The counter had been oiled so many times across, so many years, that the coin did not roll. It just sat there, bright, small, terminal. "Bread," she said. "And a name." That got the woman's eyes. Merritt's hand paused halfway to the shelf. "Bread is 10 cents. A beat. Name is free." Aloan let that sit. "HALE." The name went into the air of the store, and did not come back. Merritt Beale did not move for a long moment. Her chin came up, slow, the way a person turns toward a sound they had hoped had stopped happening years ago. And for a full breath, she did not look at Aloan at all. She looked past her, at the door, at the street, checking the shape of who might be standing close enough to hear, because names were free. But some names were not free to say. "You rode a long way," Merritt said. She set the loaf on the counter without wrapping it. "Long way to come and dig up a grave nobody has asked after." "I am not here to dig up a grave." "No." Merritt took the dime. She did not put it in the drawer. She held it, turning it once between two fingers. "You are here to prove one has got the wrong man in it." She paused. "That is worse. Graves keep quiet. Proof does not." Aloan picked up the bread. It was 2 days old, dense as a fist, the best thing she had smelled in a week. At the door she stopped. Who would remember? Merritt Beale looked at the coin in her palm a moment longer. Then she put it in the drawer, and the drawer closed. And the sound of it was the sound of a subject being ended. Rufus Kane would. A beat. If he would talk, which he will not. Aloan stood in the doorway a moment. She let the wind take her hair back off her face. She nodded once. She walked out. Behind her, Merritt Beale stood at the counter, with both hands flat on the wood, looking at nothing, because a name she had not heard spoken out loud in this town for nearly 40 years had just walked in on the boots of a girl who did not know yet what kind of door she was standing at. Outside, the light had gone long. Aloan stood on the boardwalk, with a loaf against her ribs, and the whole street in front of her. And she made herself eat only a third of it, and she made herself do it slowly, because a stomach that has gone empty will punish you for kindness delivered too fast. She looked down the street toward the bank, the stone face, the square shoulders, the gold letters over the door that said Ainsworth and Company, Reserve Deposit, established 1849. She touched the letter through her coat. She said it under her breath. Not to God. Not yet. Only to the man who had written the letter. The man whose name she carried. "All right, Grandpa. Let us see what they made of you." The bank opened at 8 in the morning. She was standing at the door at 10 minutes before, hands folded in front of her coat. Coat brushed as clean as trail dust allows a thing to be brushed. Hair pinned in a way that had taken her 20 minutes by the water trough, with no mirror. The clerk who unlocked the door was a thin man past 50. He had a careful mouth, and ink worked so deep into the first 2 fingers of his right hand that no amount of scrubbing was ever going to lift it. Harlan Voss had kept the books in that room since 1849. He had watched the stone go up around him. He unlocked the door. He saw who was standing on the other side. And something went across his face, so fast that a person not looking for it would have missed it entirely. Eloin was looking for it. She had spent her whole life reading faces for the moment the name landed. "Coming out of the wind, miss." Behind him, at a broad desk of dark oak, sat Thaddeus Ainsworth, 56 years old, heavy through the middle, black waistcoat, a gold watch chain looped across his belly like a rope across a gate. He ran that bank the way a hawk runs a fence post, not by working it, only by sitting on it, seeing everything, and being the reason nothing else lands there. Eloin came to the desk. She did not sit. She had not been asked to sit. She stated her business plainly. She gave her name. She gave the year. She said the word deed. Thaddeus Ainsworth did not laugh right away. That was the part she would remember later, when she finally understood what she had actually been looking at. He set his pen down first. He looked at her for the space of 3 full breaths, and his eyes went once, quick, to the door behind her, checking it the same way Merritt Beale had checked hers. Then he laughed. It came out easy, generous, almost warm. The laugh of a man who had heard a joke told badly by somebody too young to know better. He waved 2 fingers at Harlan Voss, without looking away from her. And Harlan went to the shelf, and brought down a ledger bound in brown calf, set it on the oak, opened it, and did not raise his eyes from it again. "HALE." Ainsworth ran a thumb down the column. "Here we are. A parcel filed in your great-grandfather's name, 38 years back. A beat. Never claimed." He turned the book a quarter turn, so she could see the copperplate hand. "Never taxed either, on account of nobody in this county ever wanting it badly enough to pay $1 for the privilege. I would like to claim it. I am sure you would." Now the laugh came back, with teeth in it this time. "Miss HALE, I want you to understand what it is you rode 4 days for. It is the gorge. It is the rimrock. It is the drop. And about 500 feet of granite going straight down." He leaned back. The chair complained under him. There is no water on it a man could reach. No timber worth the axe. No grazing. He was thoroughly enjoying himself now. "You have come all this way." He spread his hands. "All this way to own a piece of empty air." Harlan Voss turned a page in the ledger that did not need turning. Eloin did not answer him. There was an answer in her. Hot. Complete. It had been in her since she was 7 years old in a schoolyard, where she had first learned what her surname sounded like coming out of other children's mouths. She had learned by 12 that the answer never came out the way it felt going in. She had learned by 18 that a person who argues with a laugh has already agreed to be laughed at. So she reached across the oak desk. She took the paper. She folded it. Once. Twice. She opened her coat, and she put it inside, against her ribs, where the letter already lay. "Much obliged." She nodded. Only to Harlan Voss. Only to the clerk. Then she turned, and she walked out into the morning sun. Behind her, the laughter started again. Louder now. Now that it had an audience of one who could not leave. She stood in the street of Dry Creek Hollow, with a deed to a gorge over her heart. The wind came down off the ridge. The man on the saloon porch had already told 2 other men. And the 2 other men were already grinning. So here is where you have to ask yourself something. She had no money. She had no allies. She had a horse, a hatchet, a quarter of a loaf of bread, and a piece of paper that a rich man had just handed her as a joke. There was still daylight enough to ride out. Would you have burned that deed on the boardwalk and let the wind take it? Or would you have done what she did, which was to stand there long enough for the laughter to stop mattering, and then start walking? She was 30 paces past the bank when she heard the door open behind her. Then quick footsteps on packed dirt. Harlan Voss caught her at the corner of the feed shed, out of sight of the bank windows. He had not put on his coat. He had his hands out of his pockets, which for a clerk is very nearly a shout. "Miss Hale!" He glanced back the way he had come. His voice dropped, so low she had to lean in to hold it. "You are going to want to hear a small thing. Then forget where you heard it." She nodded. "That parcel." He wet his lips. "The one that is not worth $1. A beat. It has been surveyed twice in the last 6 years. 1879, and again in 1883. Full chain survey. Both times. Quarter monument set. Filed at the county seat. Both times. At private expense." Alohan went very still. "Whose expense?" Harlan Voss looked at the ground between them, at his own stained fingers. At 36 years of keeping other men's numbers in a straight line. Weston Crane paid for both. The wind came through the gap between the buildings, dry, carrying grit. Neither of them said anything into it. She had spent her whole life listening to what the town said about her family. She had never once thought to listen to what the town's money said. "Mr. Voss." Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. "A man does not run a chain survey across a hole in the ground. Not once. Certainly not twice. No, miss." Something in his careful mouth loosened by a fraction. "He does not." "Then why did Mr. Ainsworth laugh?" Harlan Voss straightened his cuffs. One, then the other. "A man laughs loud when he wants you to stop asking what is under the laugh." He said it to her almost tenderly. "I have balanced that man's books for 27 years. He has never once laughed at a thing that did not cost him something." Then he was gone around the shed, and the street was empty, and Alohan Hale stood there in the dust of a town that had made up its mind about her before she was born, holding the first true thing anybody had given her since she rode in. By noon the story had gone the length of the town and come back around the other side, with more on it than it left with. A woman on a porch quit sweeping to watch her go by. 2 boys leaning on a hitching rail nudged each other, grinning without troubling to cover it. A man loading flour sacks into a wagon stopped, with a sack half lifted. Alohan kept her shoulders square. She had made this walk before, in a different town, when she was the smallest person in the schoolyard, with her braid coming undone and her lunch pail dented, and her grandfather's voice in her head saying only this: "Walk. Keep walking. Do not run and do not stop." She stopped at the trough. She loosened Willow's cinch a hole so the mare could breathe, let her drink, and she stood with her hand flat on that warm shoulder, feeling the animal's ribs move under her palm. Willow blew warm air across her wrist, swung one ear toward the saloon, then back, then settled it forward again, the whole of a horse's opinion delivered without a sound. "They can talk," Alohan murmured. "Talking is free. It is the only thing in this town that is." A shadow came across the boardwalk boards to her left. She looked up. He had come out of the general store, with a paper parcel under one arm. Tall, thick through the chest. Red beard trimmed close enough to show the jaw under it. A fine gray hat set low over pale eyes. His black coat had never been out in real weather in its life. His boots were polished, which in Dry Creek Hollow, in October, on a street made of dust, is not a fact about boots. It is a statement about who has to walk where. He stopped when he saw her. He smiled the way a man smiles when he has already decided how he will tell this later. At a table, to people who will laugh in the right places. "You would be the HALE girl." Aloan met his eyes and held them. "I would. Weston Crane." He tipped his head. Pleased. "Word travels." "It does." He shifted the parcel to the other arm without offering a hand. "Heard you bought yourself a hole in the ground this morning." "Inherited. Same difference out here." He waited a beat. He tipped his head. "Friendly. I hold most of what is worth holding in this valley. Timber on the north face. Water rights on Thistle Creek. 300 head wintering below the shoulder. I am telling you that so you understand. I do not need anything you have got. I am making you a courtesy. Go on. When you have had your fill of empty air, come see me. I pay fair. For a foolish deed." He paused. "Saves a girl a long ride home with nothing in her hands. $80. Paper as it sits. I will throw in provisions for the trip." $80. She had 12 cents. $80 would put a roof over her head for 6 months. $80 would put shoes on her feet that were not resold. $80 was more money than she had held all at once in her entire life. Aloan thought about the survey. 1879. 1883. Quarter monument set in granite, at private expense, on 500 feet of worthless air. "I am not selling." Weston Crane's smile widened, went warmer, and got colder underneath. At exactly the same time. "Not today, maybe?" He touched 2 fingers to the brim of that fine gray hat. Mock polite. He stepped past her into the street, and then he stopped, half turned, as if the thought had only just occurred to him. "That gorge has a way of teaching folks what a thing is worth." He said it lightly. "Ask the last HALE who went down it." The men on the saloon porch laughed. One of them lifted his hat and called something after her she did not catch, and the others laughed harder at it than it deserved. Aloan stood very still beside her mare. She did not turn to watch him go. She did not look at the porch. She unhitched Willow's rein from the ring, and she led her at a walk toward the livery, and the whispers came along behind her the whole way, the way flies come along behind a wound. The livery sat at the north end, a wide dim barn, smelling of straw, iron, manure, and horses. A boy of about 12 was forking out a stall at the far end with the grim efficiency of somebody who had done a thing 10,000 times. He had a canvas apron too big for him, tied twice around. His name was Elias Ward, though she would not learn that for another day. He looked up when her shadow crossed the doorway, took her in entire. The patched coat, the tired mare, the way she carried the loaf like it mattered. He looked back down at his fork, without a word. "I will brush down 2 head." For a night in the loft. The boy did not stop working. He tipped his head toward the ladder once, and that was the whole of the negotiation. She brushed down 4. The loft was hot under the shingles even after dark, thick with chaff. The straw got into the collar of her shirt no matter which way she lay. Below her Willow shifted in the stall, stamped once at something in a hoarse dream, went still. The town settled by degrees. Somebody laughed at the saloon. A dog worked its way down the street, barking at everything. then nothing, then quit. Aloan lay on her back in the chaff, with her hands folded on her chest, one on top of the letter. And she did the thing she had been not doing since April. Not the whole letter. Not yet. She closed her eyes instead. And she prayed. She had not prayed since the day they had put her grandfather in the ground. The ground had been so hard that the man with the spade had charged extra. She had watched him drive it in. Twice. 3 times. And whatever mechanism does the work of prayer in a person had closed itself afterward. Not out of anger. She was not angry at God. She was only tired. In a way she had not had a word for. Now she lay in the hot dark of a stranger's loft in a town that hated her name. And she found she had words again. "Lord," she said it silent, only her lips moving. "I am here. I do not know why I am here. I do not know what you are asking. I do not have anything left to give. You know that. You watched me count it. A beat. But my grandfather was a good man. And he died with this letter in his hand. And if there is any part of this that you care about, any small part, then help me not to be a coward tonight. And help me not to be a fool tomorrow. And if those 2 things are the same thing, help me anyway." She stopped. She listened. The wind pushed at the loft window. A horse below her sighed. She said the last part barely at all. He was so lonely, Lord. He was so lonely at the end. And he did not deserve it. Then she was quiet. For a long time. Until at last she opened her eyes. The moon had come up over the ridge. It had put a square of silver light across the boards of the loft floor, right beside her hand. She took it as an answer. She was not sure of what. But she took it. She sat up. She reached inside her coat. And she brought out the letter. She had read the first page twice before. Both times in April. Both times she had stopped after the first page. Because the first page was the part that hurt. And she had told herself the rest was more of the same. She was going to read all 3 pages tonight. She unwrapped the oilcloth. She unfolded the pages. She held them in the square of moonlight. The paper had gone soft at the folds. The ink had faded at the ends of the lines. Her grandfather's hand had been shaky at the end. Jonah HALE had been 63 years old when he died. He had raised her from 4 years old, after the fever had gone through their part of the country, and taken her mother in 1 week, and her father in the next, and left the girl in a house with nobody in it. He had raised her on beans, on hard work, on the notion that a person's word was the only thing they truly owned. Page 1 said what she already knew, that his father Ellery HALE had driven a bank wagon out of Dry Creek Hollow on the 15th of October 1847, heading down the pass road toward the valley, with a strong box of coin silver under the floorboards. That there had been a storm, one of the big ones, off the high country, that the wagon never reached the valley. Neither did Ellery. Neither did the silver. That 2 days later somebody had found wheel ruts running off the edge of a place called Widow Gorge, 500 feet of nothing between the rim and the water. That the town had made its decision in less than a month. He ran. He staged the wreck. He walked out of the country with his pockets full. The word thief is light to pick up. It fits any hand. Aloan turned to the second page. The second page was different. There is a fir tree above Widow Gorge, on the north rim, standing alone where the trace bends west. It was struck through the crown before I was born. It has not fallen yet. When I was a boy my father took me to it twice, and both times he made me look at it a good while before we rode on. And both times he said nothing about why, and I was too young to ask a question that wanted answering. I have thought about that tree for 38 years. Aloan lowered the page. She sat with it in her lap, and she looked at the square of moonlight on the boards, and she felt the whole shape of the thing turning under her. A father does not take a boy twice to a dead tree at the edge of nothing for no reason. She picked up the third page. Her hand was steady. She noticed that. She noticed it the way you notice the sound of your own breathing has changed. You will want to know why I never went back to get this done myself. You have a right to the answer, and I have been a coward about giving it to you, while I could still see your face when you heard it. Aloan stopped reading. She stopped for so long that the moonlight had moved a full hand's width across the floor before she picked the page back up. Because the word coward was not a word her grandfather used. Her grandfather had used careful, and enough, and in due time. And so long as we are here, he had never once in his life used the word coward. She read on. In the spring of 1848, I was told to leave Dry Creek Hollow. Nathaniel Crane told me, in his own front room, with 2 men standing behind me by the door. He held the paper on my father's outfit, the team, the harness, the little bit of ground we had on Thistle Creek, and he held a note my father had signed the year before, that I had never been shown. He said the note was called. He said the county had no interest in a thief's boy, and no work in it for one either, and that if I was still in the district come the 1st of June, he would see me answer for money my father had taken, which he knew as well as I did. My father never took. I was 25. I had no lawyer. I had no witness. I had my mother in a bed she did not get out of again until October. So I went. And standing at the top of the pass, with everything we had left in one wagon, I swore an oath. And it was a young man's oath, and I have paid for the shape of it every year since, that I would not set foot in Dry Creek Hollow again, until the day my father's name was clean. I meant it as a promise. I have come to understand it was a cage. I built it myself, out of pride, and I stayed in it 37 years, and every year the door got easier to keep shut. Aloan made a sound. She did not mean to. It was the sound a person makes when a picture of somebody they love reorganizes itself in front of them, when the person they thought had been stubborn was afraid the whole time, and the fear had been put in him by another man, with a name that was still on half the fences in the county. Her whole life she had believed her grandfather had let the thing lie, because it could not be lifted. It had never once occurred to her that he had been forbidden to lift it, and that he had then bound himself with his own words so tightly that the forbidding had never had to be repeated. There is a particular loneliness in learning a thing like that. Aloan wiped her face with the back of her hand. She had not known she was crying. She read the last of it. If you go, go slow. Do not run at it like a hungry dog runs at meat. The country will tell the truth to anybody patient enough to sit still and let it. And if there is anything down there, and if it is ever counted out in daylight where people can see it, set aside a portion in his name. Not for us. We do not need it, and I will not be there to spend it. Put it to the church roof, which was leaking the year we left, or into the schoolhouse, so that the children of that town learn their letters under a name they were taught to spit at. Let that be the last word in it. It is a better one than mine. The moonlight had moved off the pages by the time she folded them. She wrapped them in the oilcloth with the deed, and she tied the cord, and she put the whole of it inside her coat. Then she lay down in the chaff, with her arm across her chest, over the place where the paper was, and she did not sleep so much as wait. The waiting had a floor under it, for the first time in her life. Aloan HALE, 20 years old, with 12 cents spent, and none coming, lay in the loft of a livery in Dry Creek Hollow, and made a decision. She was going to go slow. She was going to sit still. She was going to let the country tell the truth to her the way her grandfather had said it would. And when she came back down off that ridge with whatever it was that had been waiting up there for 38 years to be found, she was going to lay it on a stone counter in a stone bank in the middle of a stone town. And she was going to give her grandfather back the word he had not been able to say, which was not thief, which had never been thief, which had only been, and always been, his. She closed her eyes. She slept. And in the dark, over the ridge, the fir tree stood where it had stood since before any of them, split through the crown by lightning 80 years back. An iron wedge driven into its heart at chest height by the hand of a careful man who had known, on the 15th of October in 1847, at 4 in the afternoon, with a storm coming down off the pass, that something had gone wrong, and that somebody someday would have to come and find out what. The tree had waited. It had been waiting a long time. But it was not going to have to wait much longer. She woke before the sky had color in it. For a moment she did not remember where she was, only that there was straw in her hair, and a horse breathing below her, and a piece of paper against her heart that was heavier than paper had any right to be. Then it all came back at once. The bank, the laugh, the clerk at the corner of the feed shed with stained fingers, Weston Crane with his polished boots on a street made of dust, her grandfather's voice in her head saying the word coward for the first and last time. Aloan sat up in the chaff. She wiped her face, rebraided her hair with fingers that did not need light to do it. Straw fell out. She did not brush it off her coat. There was no point. She climbed down the ladder in the dark. She was halfway across the barn floor when a voice came out of a square of dust just inside the door, where she would have sworn was empty when she walked past it. "You favor him." She stopped. She did not turn right away. She turned slow. An old man was sitting on an upturned barrel, in a square of dusty light that was somehow already there, though the sun was not yet up outside. Long limbs, stooped in the shoulders, a white beard cut square at the jaw, a battered black hat resting on one knee. He had a length of harness leather across his hands, a rag, a small tin of tallow. He was working the leather slow, the way a man works, when the work is only an excuse to be sitting where he is sitting. His eyes when they came up were the pale blue of a winter sky an hour before it snows. "Your grandfather." He went back to the leather. "You favor him about the eyes. The rest of you your own." Aloan's mouth had gone dry. "You knew Jonah HALE. Rode a season with him. 46, 47. He drew the rag once down the full length of the leather, and the tallow darkened it, and he did it again. I was a straight man. His father was a straighter one, which is a hard thing to be, in a town like this, then or now." She came a step closer. "Everyone here says his father was a thief. Everyone here says a lot of things." His voice never rose. "Saying is cheap. $80 is cheap too. And I heard what he offered you out there. Same as the whole street did." Aloan stopped 4 feet from the barrel. "Then tell me what is true." The old man did not answer for long enough that she thought he had decided against it. Down the barn Elias Ward had stopped forking. Somewhere above them a bird moved in the rafters and resettled. "A gorge keeps its own counsel." He turned the leather over. "But every gorge has got a top to it, and a bottom to it, and a man who fell was standing somewhere before he fell." He paused. "Nobody in 38 years has thought that worth an hour of daylight." He raised his eyes to her then, and the pale blue of them held her. the way still water holds a dropped stone. All the way down. Look at where the standing was done. She said it back to him. Barely a whisper. Standing. Where there is 4 miles of rim on that thing. There is. Mister. She stopped. She did not know what to call him. Rufus Kane. He said it like a man laying down a card he had been holding for a long time. And that is the whole of what I have got for you. Take it, or leave it in the straw for the horses. He stood, the way an old back makes a man stand, in 2 motions instead of 1. He settled the hat on his head, and he walked out past her, into the first gray light, without another word. Aloan stood a long moment. She said the word out loud, only to herself. Standing. She did not understand it yet. She turned toward the stall. And there, on the flat of the stall gate, somebody had laid a coil of rope. 40 feet of it. Good hemp. Better than anything else in that building. Under a canvas apron that was too big for the boy who owned it. Elias Ward was not in the barn. 2 people in this town had helped her already. Neither of them had asked for a thing back. Aloan picked up the rope. She lashed it behind the cantle. And by the time the sun came over the ridge, she had led Willow out the back way of the livery. Past the church. Past the leaning iron of the graveyard. Onto the rutted track that bent north toward the high country, where the map in her grandfather's hand said the land was cut in 2. The trace climbed for the first mile through scrub oak, still holding its brown leaves, then leveled onto a broad shoulder of grass, where the frost had not yet come. Ravens crossed overhead. In 2s, the wind carried last year's needles, and under that, faint, the wet mineral smell of water running somewhere below, and out of sight. Aloan let the mare pick her own pace. She watched the country the way she had been taught to watch it on cattle drives, when she was 9, and 10, and 11, riding drag in a hat too big for her. Not for what was there, but for what did not belong. The lean of the trees told you which way the weather came from. The run of the water told you where the rock was soft. A country will tell the truth to any rider slow enough to listen for it, and it never once tells the truth to a man in a hurry. By mid-morning, the track had narrowed to a single line of packed dirt. By noon it had lost itself entirely in scree and pine duff, and she was riding on instinct and her grandfather's map together, laying one against the other, trusting the scene where they met. She got down twice to lead Willow, over slabs where shod hooves might have slipped. The afternoon was going long, when the ground ahead began to change color in a way that had nothing to do with the light. A pale strip of sky, showing through the trees, where sky had no business being that low. And then she saw it, standing alone on the bare shoulder above the drop, 100 yards off, black against all the emptiness behind it. A great split spar of a tree, dead, 30 years or 50 or 80. No green left on it anywhere, open from crown to root and still upright. Still keeping its watch over the country the way it had been keeping it, since before any man now breathing in Dry Creek Hollow had drawn a first breath. Aloan's hands went still on the reins. Willow stopped without being told. She sat there a long moment, with her heart going hard and even in her chest, and the wind coming up out of the cut ahead. Cold, steady, endless. 38 years. And not one soul in that valley had ridden out to look. She touched her coat where the paper was, and she said it to the mare, to the tree, to the man who had stood here before her and left something behind. All right. A beat. Let us see what they have all been walking past. She rode the last 100 yards at a walk. The ground under Willow's hooves changed as they came out of the timber. Duff gave way to bare granite. scabbed with lichen, gray-green, brittle underfoot. 20 feet from the trunk the wind hit her full in the face, cold as a well, coming straight up out of the earth in a slow endless exhale that lifted the mare's mane sideways, and held it there. Aloan tied Willow to the fur. She loosened the cinch 2 holes. Then she walked the last 20 paces on her own feet, because it seemed like the sort of thing a person ought to do standing up. The ground quit, without any warning at all. No slope to it, no shelving edge. One stride there was rock under her boot. The next there was a gulf, so wide it changed the weather. Widow Gorge ran east to west, as far as she could follow it in either direction, 500 feet down by any honest guess, its walls falling away in long uneven staircases of gray granite, streaked rust red, where iron had bled out of the stone across a few thousand winters. The far wall stood a good stone's throw off. Ravens worked the middle air between the 2 faces well below her. At the bottom, a thread of water, Thistle Creek, or what was left of it by October. No wider from up here than a length of silver wire somebody had dropped in the dark. She stood on the lip, with her toes 18 inches from nothing, hands loose at her sides, wind pushing her coat flat against her ribs. There was no wagon. She had known there would not be. She had told herself the whole 4 days out, from the county line, that 38 years of storms would have scattered anything a person left, that she was riding toward a question rather than an answer, knowing it did not do a single thing to blunt the moment of looking. Aloan sat down on the edge, folded her legs under her, put her hands in her lap. She had ridden 4 days on a dime's worth of bread, toward 500 feet of empty air, exactly as a man in a black waistcoat had promised her she would. She did not cry. That surprised her a little. She had spent all of it in April, and whatever mechanism does, that work in a body had closed itself afterward. So she just sat, with the whole cold breath of the gorge coming up across her face, and let it be true for a while. The sun crossed. The shadows in the cut deepened, from gray to a bruised blue, filling it from the bottom up the way water fills a trough. Somewhere below her a rock let go on its own, without cause, without anybody near it. It took 4 seconds to reach the water. She counted them without meaning to. She built no fire that night. She led Willow back, from the edge, into a hollow behind the furze root mass, pulled the saddle, hobbled the mare long, so she could reach the thin grass, spread the wool blanket on a bed of needles. She ate half of the last of the bread. She drank 4 swallows, which was less than she wanted by about 6. Aloan lay down, with her skull on the folded saddle skirt, and she said her prayer. Only the prayer. No preamble. Lord, I am here. Show me where the standing was done. Amen. Then she was quiet. The gorge made a sound, not silence. A low continuous murmur that came up over the lip in the same breath as the cold. Many small voices held far down under stone running together, never once resulting into a word. Water on rock. Most likely. It did not sound like water. She turned Rufus Cain's sentence over in her mind, the way a hand turns a stone found in a creek. Look at where the standing was done. She did not understand it yet. She let it lie, somewhere below her, in the blue dark. The last of the sun came off the western ridge in one long stray shaft, low enough to reach in under the overhang of the far wall, so that for 3 or 4 seconds it struck a place down there that had been in shadow all day. Something in that shadow caught it, gave back one small hard point of light. Gone. Aloan was on her feet, before she knew she had moved, at the rim, staring into a cut already gone blue-black to the bottom. Seeing nothing. Mica and shale. Wet rock at the right angle. a sliver of quartz doing what quartz does at the end of an October day. She stood there until the cold came through her coat sleeves, because a thing you cannot prove is not the same as a thing that did not happen, and she had spent her entire life on the wrong side of that difference. She woke before the light, with pine on her tongue. She rolled the blanket. She did not eat, because there was a quarter of a loaf left, hard as a hoof, and hunger was cheaper than the ride. She led Willow to the lip. She stood where she had stood the evening before, watching the eastern rim, waiting. When the sun came, it came all at once, pouring gold down the far face in a wide, clean sheet. Her own wall stayed in shadow. She watched the line come down the opposite granite, tracking the minutes by how far it had crawled. Nothing flashed. Nothing answered. The creek ran on unbothered. She turned away from the edge, with the taste of the whole thing turning sour in her mouth. Walked back toward the fur to check the hobble. Told herself she would give it one more day out of stubbornness. Then ride down. Sell the deed. Buy boots. It was in the turning that her eye caught what her eye had walked past 4 times already. The tree was split, from crown to root. She had taken that for the lightning, because her grandfather's letter had said struck through the crown. The split had a shape. She stopped. She came back 2 steps. At chest height, seated deep in the black char, was an iron wedge. Not a stone. Not a knot. A forged wedge. Tapered. Driven in flat. Its head gone entirely to rust, so that it looked at first like a scab of the wood itself. Somebody had struck that in with a maul. Somebody had left it below and got her fingers around the head of it. It moved. Not at all. 38 autumns of wet had swollen the wood around the iron, until they had become the same object. Lightning splits a tree ragged. This split was clean-lipped along one edge for 18 inches. It had been opened. The lightning had done the killing years before. A man with a wedge had done the rest. Deliberately. On a tree already dead. For no reason. A man never wedges dead wood, unless the point was not the wood. She went down on her knees. She cleared the needles away from the base of the trunk with the flat of her palm, working around, sweeping, until she had bared a hand's width of char at the root. There was a letter cut into it, an H, cut with a knife point. The strokes gone soft and rounded at their edges, from 3.5 decades of weather working at them. But an H, unmistakable, 4 inches tall. Beneath it, a single straight line scored across. Beneath that line, shallower, almost worn out entirely, the trough of what could only be an arrow. It did not point out along the trace the way a man marks a road. It pointed sideways, along the rim, west. Aloan sat back on her heels, in the needles, hands hanging, breath gone strange in her chest. The fur stood over her, black, patient. She spoke it out loud, to the char, because there was nobody within 4 miles to hear how her voice sounded when it shook. You knew before it happened. A beat. You already knew. She did not follow the arrow. Everything in her wanted to be up, running west along that rim, and she made herself stay on her knees until the wanting had passed through her. Her grandfather's line came back to her. Do not run at it like a hungry dog runs at meat. A hungry dog gets the meat. Then it gets the stick. She stood, walked back to Willow, put both hands flat on the mare's neck, and stayed there breathing until her fingers were steady. Look at where the standing was done. The old man had not been talking about the gorge at all. He had never once meant the bottom. He had meant the ground a man chooses for himself, in the last hour, when he still has a choice. Before the ground goes ahead and chooses for him. Rufus Kane had known there was something on the rim. He had known it sitting on a barrel in the dark, oiling a strap. He did not need to oil. For however many years he had been sitting there, saying it to nobody. Alone spent the rest of that morning making a camp, which is not what a person does when they have just found the first proof anybody has ever had. It was exactly what she did. A ring of stones for a fire she did not yet light. A peg driven for the canteen. A flat rock for the saddle set on its side, so the sheepskin would dry out. She cut a length off Elias Ward's rope with the hatchet. The hand settles first. Her grandfather had said it. Standing over a horse with a bad hoof. Over a fence in a wind. Over a bed in the last week of his life, when she could not stop shaking. By noon there was a camp. By noon her hands would hold a cup level. She walked the rim that afternoon. She kept 20 paces back from the edge, moving west, into the direction the worn arrow had pointed, watching the ground the way she had watched it for cattle when she was a child. Not for what was there, but for what did not belong. 200 paces west she found the second one, a slab of gray granite chest high, standing a little apart from the general run of the ridge. She had to crouch, had to turn her head, until the low light raked across it sideways, before it showed another H below the letter, gouged into the rock itself. A shallow cup, about the size of a man's closed fist. Aloan pressed her palm into it. It fit. It took the heel of her hand, the pad below the thumb, the whole cradle of a human hand, set into stone, at the exact height a person would put a hand, if they leaned there to look down. Somebody had worked that cup with a tool. Then somebody had rested there, over and over, long enough for the granite to give up its edges, to the skin of one man's hand. She stayed with her palm in it a while. He had stood here more than once. Whatever this was, it had not been the work of one bad afternoon. 100 paces further, the third, a pine stump, squared off with an axe, so long ago that the cut face had gone the silver gray of old barn siding. Its flat side deliberately turned toward the gorge. Driven into that face was a single iron nail, 6 inches of it, bent over into a hook. On the hook, nothing at all, only a dark stain running down the wood beneath it, 4 inches long, where something had hung, taken on rust, wept it into the grain, season after season, then rotted through at last. Drop gone. Aloan stood at that stump longer than she had stood at either of the others. 3 marks. 3 points along the rim. A line laid down west, by a man who had considered seriously that he might not be coming back, who had wanted the way to it kept, for whoever finally bothered to come looking. A man who had left a trail. Not for the town that would condemn him, but for somebody who did not exist yet. She turned back toward the fir, counting her paces aloud, fixing the distances so she could walk that line in the dark if she ever had to. A person could ride past it for 38 years. A person had. That night she permitted herself no fire again. She slept with her hand under her coat, on the paper over her heart. She did not dream. She woke at gray light, with a plan already finished in her hands, before it had gotten as far as her head, which is how the good ones arrive. The first day she cut a path. She used her grandfather's hatchet, the one with his grip worn into the leather, working the brush out of the line between the fir, the slab, the stump. Manzanita fought her. Dead limbs came out of the duff at the wrong angle. By midday her palms had blistered. By 2 the blisters had opened. She wrapped both hands in a strip torn from the tail of her shirt. The second day she went down. Not far. 20 feet. No more. On a shelf she had spotted, from the rim, roped around her waist. On the shelf, half buried in a crack packed with a century's worth of blown grit, she found iron. A broken length of banding, 14 inches, snapped clean across at one end, its rivet hole still perfectly round. She laid it beside the fire ring in the last of the light. She sat looking at it a long time. She knew wagon iron. Iron of that gauge was made for a lid. She said one word out loud. To nobody. Lid. The third day she went deeper. She had found a chimney east of the fir, where the wall broke inward. A vertical fault a body could work down, with a back braced against one side, boots against the other, dropping in short measured stages. She rigged herself to Willow's saddle horn, with the saddle itself set over the flat rock, so the mare would be carrying only what a horse ought to carry. You hold. I will come back up. 60 feet down the chimney, wedged under a rockfall, Aloan found a length of oak board. It had been a floor plank, 2 inches thick, a foot wide, splintered at both ends, its exposed edge blackened to charcoal softness by 38 wet winters. She worked it out with the hatchet, and it came free at last in a shower of grit. The underside had been face down against the rock the whole time, protected, dry as a book on a shelf. The grain still carried a wheelwright's brand burned into it, small, sharp-edged, a 5-pointed star inside a circle, beneath the brand, cut into the wood with a knife tip. In a hand she almost knew. And Aloan climbed back up that wall with the board lashed across her back. She did not sleep at all that night. She let herself have the fire at last, a small one, and she sat, with the iron band across one knee and the oak board across the other, turning them in the firelight, reading the star inside the circle, reading the letter under it, over and over. The whole town had built its arithmetic on the notion that Ellery Hale had walked away. She had a wagon plank 60 feet down a cliff face, with his mark on it. She had an iron band off a strongbox lid. She had 3 carved letters walking west along a rim, a wedge driven into a dead tree, a hollow in granite worn to the shape of one man's hand. A man who runs does not sign the country behind him. Whatever had come up, that rode out of Dry Creek Hollow on the 15th of October 1847. It had not been an accident. It had not been a robbery of a bank by its own driver. And it had not been unwitnessed by the man it happened to. He had known. He had marked it. He had run out of time. She looked into the fire, until the fire went to coals. 38 years, she said. To the dark. To the horse. To the tree standing behind her. You have been up here the whole time saying it. A beat. Nobody ever came close enough to listen. At first light on the 4th day. She rose without eating, because there was nothing left to eat, and coiled the rope, and checked every knot twice, with her raw hands. She rigged it differently this time. She led Willow closer to the head of the chimney, set the saddle on the flat stone as an anchor, ran the line around the horn, then around the stone itself, taking 2 full turns, so that the friction of granite would hold what a horse should never be asked to hold alone. She hobbled the mare's 4 legs loose, so she could not walk off, took hold of the rope. Then she went over the edge. She descended slower than the day before. She knew the chimney now, knew the good shelf at 30 feet, where a person could stand flat-footed, knew the place at 50, where the granite had gone to rotten crumb, below the level where the oak board had been. The fault opened. It gave onto a wider shelf than she had understood from above, a ledge running 20-odd feet along the wall, 10 deep, hidden entirely from the rim by an overhang of rock that stuck out above it like a hat brim. From the top you would look straight past this. From the far wall, if there had been anybody on the far wall in 38 years. You would see nothing but shadow. Aloin came down onto that ledge in cold blue light, with the rope still in her fist. The wagon lay on its side, against the back wall. She did not move for a long time. Her breath went out of her in one long unspooling that had nothing to do with the climb. It was smaller than it had lived in her mind. Everything about it was gray. The boards gone to driftwood silver, where the weather had reached them, streaked with the same rust that bled down the granite behind. The near wheel had burst. Its spoke stuck up out of the scree like the ribs of something. The far wheel was gone entirely. The tongue had snapped clean off and lay 6 feet away, pointing at nothing. The canvas cover had rotted to threads that moved a little in the draft. She made herself walk to it. She set her hand flat on the wagon bed, felt that would give slightly under her fingers, then hold, and something in her chest gave the same way. She went around the near end, stepping over stone. Under the tilted floor she stopped, because something was wrong. Or something was right. She could not tell yet. The floorboards had been laid the way any wagon bed is laid. Planks across the frame, butted tight. Except for one plank near the middle. That was not butted tight to anything. It had been lifted. She could see the char lines, where it had been pried up, long ago, and the rough edge, where the pry bar had gone in, and the way it had been set back down, not quite square. Somebody had gone under this bed. Not after the fall. Before. Aloin crouched. She worked her fingers under the loose edge. She lifted the plank. It came up in her hand, half-rotted, light as balsa. And there, under the floor of that wagon, wedged into a space it could never have gotten into by accident, sitting exactly where a careful driver had put it, on the 15th of October 1847, covered by a length of oilcloth, once waxed, now cracked, curled at every edge. But there was the strongbox. Aloin sat down on the scree, with the plank still in her hand. She sat there a long time. She said one word, barely at all. "Grandpa." The box was not large. Maybe 30 inches across, 18 deep, banded in iron in 3 courses. The wood between the bands gone black, swollen hard as stone. The lock plate was the size of her palm. The hasp was whole. The staple was through it. The lock was set. Aloin knelt on the scree. She did not try it. She did not touch the hasp at all. She brushed the grit off the top of the lid with the side of her wrapped hand. Slow, until the wood beneath showed, burned into the lid under the top band. A 5-pointed star inside a circle, stamped into the iron beside it. Small, the letters of the bank at Dry Creek Hollow. She sat back on her heels in the blue cold, with her hands in her lap, hearing the water 500 feet down, and the wind 200 feet up. Alone on a ledge that no living person knew existed. Every word of it collapsed at once. 38 years of arithmetic done by men who never once rode out to check their own figures. A locked box, hidden under the wagon bed, by the man who was supposed to be running with it. Still fastened, still full, or still empty, but never opened. There was no version of the story the town had told itself, in which that box was sitting here, in this condition. A thief opens the box. A thief who cannot open it does not leave it. Nobody carries silver off a cliff face inside its own iron. Nobody hides a box he intends to steal under the floor of the wagon he intends to wreck. Every mouth in Dry Creek Hollow that had ever shaped the word HALE had been arguing, with a padlock they never bothered to look at. Her hands were shaking. She folded them together in her lap to make them stop. And this time it did not work. so she let them shake. She looked past the box, between the wagon bed's underside and the granite, thrown there by the same fall that had wedged everything else, was a second thing she had not expected to see. A leather satchel, flapped down, buckle gone green, the hide cracked and curled at every edge, but whole. Aloan worked it out with both hands. The leather was hard, as a boot sole left in the sun. The buckle would not move. She cut the strap with the hatchet. One careful stroke. Inside was a package of oilcloth folded over 3 times. Whatever tallow or wax had been worked into that cloth in 1847 had gone on doing its patient job in the dark for 38 years. She unfolded it on her knee. A bill of lading. Ruled paper. The ink gone brown, but every stroke of it legible. Dated the 15th of October 1847. The consignment named. The route named. And at the bottom, 2 signatures. The driver's hand. Plain and upright. Unhurried. A man who had learned his letters late and took them seriously. Ellery HALE. The countersign beside it. Larger. Looping. Confident with money. Nathaniel Crane. Aloan read it twice. She read that second name a third time. Not a stranger. Not a bank clerk. The man who had come into a front room in the spring of 1848, with 2 men standing behind the door, holding a note that a dead man was supposed to have signed, telling a 25-year-old boy that the county had no interest in a thief's son. The man who had run the wagon out. The man who had ruined the family of the driver who never came back. The same hand on both papers. Her eyes went back up the sheet. She had nearly missed it. The weight column. 2 entries. Gross. And net. Written in the same brown ink as the rest. In the driver's plain upright hand. Underneath the gross figure, showing through where the pen had been pressed too hard, was another figure. Different ink. Blacker. Sharper. A different hand entirely. All loops. Somebody had scraped and written over the number. Aloan held the sheet up against the sky, tilting it, and the doubled stroke stood out like a bone under skin. The figure Ellery HALE had written down was smaller than the figure that had been put on top of it. She sat with that on the ledge for a long while. The bank's books would say a certain amount of coin silver left Dry Creek Hollow that morning. The driver's copy said less had actually been loaded into his wagon. Nathaniel Crane had signed both. He had taken silver off the top before the wheels ever turned, changed the paper afterward, then waited for a wagon to come down safe. In the valley, where the shortfall would land on exactly 1 man, only the wagon never came down. The storm did the arithmetic instead. He had not even had to finish the crime. The country finished it for him. "That is why," she said it out loud to the wagon, to the box, to the man who had knelt on the rim above. "You saw the paper was wrong. A beat. You stopped up top to say so." The wind moved the canvas threads. There was one thing more in the satchel. It had worked its way down into the seam at the bottom. She got it out with 2 fingers. A pocket watch. Brass gone black-green. Its glass long since gone. The chain broken off short. She turned it over. The back was engraved. Deep enough that 38 years had not taken it. Ellery HALE. The hands had stopped at 20 minutes past 4. Aloan closed her fingers around it. It was cold. Then it was not, because her palm was warm. For in the afternoon on the 15th of October 1847, and the storm coming down out of the high country, and a careful man on a rim road with a bad paper in his satchel. She sat on the ledge with the watch in one hand. the folded lading in the other, the locked box at her knee. She refolded the paper along its own old creases, slid it into the oilcloth against her ribs, where the deed already was, put the watch in her coat pocket, buttoned it. She set her palm flat on the lid of the strongbox. She set it quietly, so that only the stone, the wagon, the long-gone driver, could hear how it came out. "I came." A beat. "Great-grandpa, I came." She got back up the chimney as the light was going. Twice her arms failed her, and she hung, boots braced, forehead against granite, waiting for the strength to come back. When her hand came over the lip at last, Willow was standing exactly where she had been left, rope taut, ears forward, and the mare took one deliberate step backward as Aloan cleared the edge. Aloan lay on her back in the needles, with her chest heaving, looking up at a sky going the color of a peach skin, laughing in a broken, silent way that was not entirely laughter. That night the wind changed. It came off the ridge in a long, low shove that laid the fire flat, set the fur groaning in its char, and it smelled wrong. Wet, metallic, the iron smell of weather building somewhere high up. Aloan knew that smell. Every child raised in that country knew it. She built the fire ring higher with stone. She moved the mare into the deepest fold of the hollow, took the saddle and blanket under the shelter of the root mass, lashed them, weighted the corners with rock. She checked the hobble. She wrapped the iron band, the oak board, the watch, in the wool. She did not lie down. She sat with her back against the fur, the bill of lading over her heart, watching the dark. For the first drop, the voices came before the rain did. 2 horses on the trace moving faster than the footing deserved. Then a laugh she recognized. From a boardwalk 4 days earlier, Weston Crane rode into her firelight. Gray hat pulled low, black coat buttoned to the throat. A second man behind him on a bay, thick through the neck, expressionless, saying nothing. Weston swung down without being invited. "Miss Hale." His voice was almost gentle. "You have been busy." Aloan stood. She did not answer. He walked to the fire ring, picked up the length of banding in one gloved hand, turned it over, weighed it, then set it back down, in precisely the spot it had come from. 500 feet of nothing. His voice was almost gentle. 500 feet of nothing, with a girl bringing pieces up out of it. For days running, on no food that I can see. He looked at her a while. "I will pay you tonight. Fair price, deed and all. $200. And you will ride out ahead of this weather with money in your coat. I am not selling." The second man's horse shifted. Nobody looked at it. "You will sell." He said it low. "Without heat, or you will lose it another way." The rain arrived then, the first hard drop striking the char of the fur like flung gravel. 1, 3, a dozen, under the sound of it. Then, coming down the trace from higher up, a woman's voice called out something wordless. Then a shape that might have been a word. Then after it, a child's. Weston Crane turned his head toward the sound. He did not move. Aloan had already taken 1 step past him, toward the trace, then another, snatching the lantern off its peg, dropping to one knee at the fire to catch a coal on the wick. The glass chimney was still hot in her raw hand when she straightened. She went out, into the dark, with rain hitting her face, into wind that took the flame sideways behind its shield, past the polished boots of the man who owned most of what was worth holding in that valley. She threw 4 words back over her shoulder, into the firelight, without turning around. "You wait your turn." A 1/4 mile up the trace, the lantern found them. A woman on foot, in a soaked traveling coat, leading a small bay pony that would not put weight on its off hind. One hand knotted in the cheekpiece, the other holding the shoulder of a boy of about 7, who walked pressed against her skirt, with his chin tucked down out of the rain. Aloan came into the circle of her own light, with water running off the brim of her hat. How far back did he go lame? The woman's relief broke over her face all at once. 2 miles, maybe. 3. I could not tell where the trace went after the timber. You are on it. It bends west at the dead fir. That is a 1/4 mile on. There is a fire down there. Aloan crouched, put the lantern into the boy's hands, closed both his small fists around the wire bale. You are the light. Hold it up, where I can see your boots. Keep it high as you can. Can you do that? The whole way. He nodded. Hard. Twice. Water flying off his hair, gripping the bale like it was a job he had been waiting his whole life to be given. What is your name? Wren. Wren. All right. Wren. You are the light. She got an arm under him, swung him up onto her hip, took the pony's rein in her free hand. The woman came up on the other side. Delia Marsh. Aloan HALE. I know. They came down the trace slow, the lantern swinging out ahead of them, and the boy held it up above Aloan's shoulder the entire way, without once letting it drop, calling out the ruts when he saw them, in a small, serious voice, like a man on a bridge crew. They came past Weston Crane, who had not moved from where he stood. They came past the second man, who had. Aloan carried the boy to the deep fold of the hollow, back behind the furze root mass, in the pocket where the wind came over the top instead of through. 30 yards off the rim, with the whole root wall between him and the drop. She set him down, out of the weather. She stripped the wet coat off him, and then she did the thing she had not planned, and could not have planned, because there was no planning it. She reached into her bundle, and she pulled out the wool blanket, the one blanket she had, the only warm thing she owned in the world. Her grandmother had made it. Aloan had never met her. Her grandmother had died the winter before Aloan was born. But she had woven that blanket in the last good year of her life, with hands that had already started to go, and she had put it in a cedar chest for a granddaughter she had known was coming. And Jonah HALE had kept it there for 20 years, until the morning Aloan rode out east, and he had brought it down from the chest, and laid it in her hands, and said only, "This will keep you when I cannot." Aloan wrapped that blanket around Wren Marsh, to the chin. She tucked it in at his shoulders. She put him on the dry saddle skirt, with his back to the granite. 7 years old, sitting in the driest square yard in that whole country, holding the lantern in his lap, because nobody had told him he could put it down yet. His mother's hands, when Aloan took them, were the temperature of the rain. Aloan folded both of them between her own raw palms, chafed the blood back into them, kept them there while the shaking came up hard, rested, then began to ease. He picked up a stone bruise, or he sprung something. Either way, he is not walking to town tonight. So nobody is walking to town tonight. Aloan's voice stayed level. Lo, there is fire. There is a wall at your back. There is a roof of sorts. That is the whole list. But it is enough. Delia's chin came up. I am not going to ask you what you are doing out here alone. That is about the first mercy this county has shown me. Aloan stood. She turned, and she faced Weston Crane across the flattened fire. He was looking at the woman, then at the boy in the blanket, then at the lantern still burning in a child's lap 3 feet from a saddle that was the only dry thing a girl with nothing had owned an hour ago, now soaked through and given away without a word of discussion. Something in the man's face came apart, while his mouth was still busy holding its shape. He had written up that trace with a proposition. A witness. A bad night. He had come to watch a starving girl learn what she was worth. He had watched instead, as she walked past $200. Past a thread delivered in front of a man brought along expressly to make it land. Past every reasonable calculation, without so much as breaking stride, because two people were cold on a road. You cannot buy the deed off somebody who was never going to be bought in the first place. And you find that out. In the exact moment, it stops being worth anything to know. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of that soaked gray hat. Another night, then. He swung up. The second man wheeled after him. The two of them went out of the firelight, into the rain, down the trace. Aloan stood in the downpour, listening, until she could not hear hooves any more. Then 20 seconds passed that. She got the fire back. It took her a long while. On her knees in the mud, with her shirt tail over the tinder. But she got it. She dried the boy's socks on hot stones. She hung Delia's coat on the hook end of a broken branch. She gave them the last thing in her possession that could be called food, which was nothing. So she gave them water from the canteen instead, warmed in the tin cup. The storm blew itself out somewhere after 3, the way the fall ones do. Furious, brief, then simply finished, leaving a sky so clear afterward that the stars looked scrubbed. Aloan did not sleep. She sat against the fir, with the rain still dripping out of the char above her, one hand inside her coat, on the packet over her heart, watching the trace, watching the rim, watching the small rise and fall of a blanket in the fold of rock behind her. By first light the country looked laundered. Delia had the fire built up. Rin was sitting cross-legged beside it, eating nothing, cheerfully, telling his mother about a lantern. Aloan walked out to the head of the chimney to check her rig. Before she did anything else, she stopped 10 feet short. The rope was gone, not frayed, not pulled loose. The end that had been made fast around the flat anchor stone lay curled in the wet grass, with 2 feet of tail on it, cut through clean, at an angle, the way a good knife goes through hemp when a man puts his weight behind it, and does not care who finds out. The rest of it, 40-odd feet of a liveried boy's gift, the only line she owned, the single thing standing between her and 500 feet of granite, was somewhere down in the bottom of Widow Gorge, with the water running over it. Aloan crouched in the wet, with the cut end in her hand, feeling the whole shape of the night rearrange itself behind her. He had not left after all. Or he had left, and then come back, or sent the other one back, in the dark, in the rain, while she sat 40 yards off, with a stranger's child asleep against the rock. Not to hurt her. He had made no move toward the hollow. There would have been no profit in it. He had done something worse than hurting her, because it was patient. Paper burns. A ledger can be lost in a fire. A wagon on a hidden ledge under an overhang invisible from the rim, with an unopened strongbox wedged into its frame, is the entire case sitting exactly where nobody in 38 years has been able to reach it. Aloan stood at the head of the chimney, with a 2-foot stub of rope in her fist. She had a bill of lading, with an altered number on it. She had a watch, with a dead man's name on the back. She had an iron band, and an oak board, and a piece of paper saying she owned the air. Take all of that down the mountain, and lay it on the counter of a stone-faced bank, in a town that had settled this question in 1847. Weston Crane had not needed to threaten her again. He had simply removed the difference between evidence and a story. She heard the boots on the granite behind her. 3 sets. Coming up from the trace. She turned. Harlan Voss. Hatless. Riding a livery mule, with the stirrups too short. His coat buttoned wrong. Elias Ward behind him on a second mule. Leading a third. Loaded with a wooden crate. Rufus Kane riding a rangy gray. Sitting at the way old men sit, who learned before they could walk. Word had gone before them somehow. It does. In small places. Though nobody could ever tell you which mouth started it moving. Elias reached her first, sliding down off the mule while it was still walking. They said Crane rode up here last night. With great evoke. The boy's eyes went past her to the cut rope in her hand. Then to her face. Then back. That is his. A beat. That is my rope. It was. His jaw set in a way that made him look for a second like a much older person. Then he owes me a rope. Delia Marsh came out from the hollow with the boy in tow. Took one look at Harlan Voss. Went straight to him. Told him in about 9 sentences what she had walked into. What had been offered. What had been threatened. In what order. In front of how many. Harlan listened without once interrupting. When she finished, he did not say anything at all for a while. He got down off the mule stiffly. He looked at the cut rope. He looked at the iron band lying on the fire stones. At the oak board leaning against the root wall, with its star burned into it. At the girl, who had gone 4 days on a quarter loaf. Then Rufus Kane got down off the gray. Walked past all of them. Without a word. Went to the fur. Put his hand flat on the char at chest height, where the iron wedge sat. He stood like that a long moment, with his back to everybody. When he turned around, the pale blue of his eyes had something in it that had not been in that barn. My father drove that wedge. The wind came across the rim. Nobody moved. October 15th, 1847. Rufus Kane's voice did not rise. Amos Kane. Shotgun messenger. Riding the box next to your great-grandfather, with a 10-gauge across his knees. 2 men went out of Dry Creek Hollow on that wagon. One came back down off this mountain. He looked out over the gorge. Not at her. The town never once asked me why the second man's name is not in the story they tell. Alohan's hands had gone cold. Your father was on that wagon. Amos got off it. Rufus's jaw worked. Ellery pulled up. Right here. 4 in the afternoon. Storm coming. Sat with the paper in his hands. He had looked at his copy. Numbers did not match what was loaded. He had weighted himself with a stone scale at the yard. He was not a man who guessed at anything. A beat. He put it together standing under this tree. He said Crane had shorted the load, altered the paper, meant to have it land on the driver in the valley. Harlan had gone very still, so Ellery sent him off. Told him to ride back to town on the messenger's horse. Quiet. Find somebody who would hear it. The sheriff. The county man. Anyone not on Crane's paper. He said he would bring the wagon down slow. That a shorted load, with 2 honest signatures on the wrong side of it, needed a witness up top more than it needed a gun on the box. He drew a breath. My father argued. He said it soft. Ellery told him. A man who stays to be robbed with you is worth less than a man who rides for the door. Alohan closed her eyes. Look at where the standing was done. Then he cut that wedge in with the maul. Put his letter under it. Said if the weather took him, somebody would come. Read it. One day. Rufus paused. My father rode. He was 4 miles gone when it came off the ridge. Delia had her hand over her mouth. He told it. March 48. Told the sheriff. Told the county man. Told anybody in that saloon who would stand still. Rufus's voice finally moved. A fraction. Nathaniel Crane had the sheriff's note. Had the county man's brother-in-law working his timber inside a year. My father lost the ground on Thistle Creek. Lost the messenger contract. Lost his name. So thorough that men crossed the street. He died in '59. Still telling it. I was 34. When they buried him. With a wife and 2 children in a town where the word king got you shorted at the counter. Silence. The particular silence a group of people make when nobody in it is breathing. Then all of them start again at once. Harlan Voss took his spectacles off. Cleaned them slowly on his shirt. Put them back on. Mr. Kane. His voice was thin. Careful. You have just told me that in March of 1848, a man named Amos Kane made a statement to a county officer regarding a short-loaded consignment. I have. Then there will be a record of it. Not a good one. Not one that went anywhere. Harlan's stained fingers had started absently to tally against his thumb. But a county officer who takes a statement, writes it down. That paper is in the county seat. In a box. With 37 years on top of it. It is worth nothing on its own. Rufus nodded slow. It was worth nothing then. On its own. Harlan turned to Aloan. Miss Hale. Do you still have what you carried out of that gorge? She got it out. She unwrapped the oilcloth. There on the whetstone. With 4 people around her. And put the bill of lading into the clerk's hands. He read it in daylight. He read it a second time. Then he tilted it against the sky. Found. The scraped figure under the figure. Went absolutely white around the mouth. That is the driver's hand on the net. He said it flat. That is Nathaniel Crane's hand on top of the gross. I have looked at both of those signatures. In that building. For the better part of my life. He lowered the sheet. This is a true paper. Miss Hale. A beat. The bank will honor it. Will it? Aloan heard how flat her own voice came out. A dead man's copy. Brought up a cliff. By a HALE. With a number on it that says the bank's own books are wrong. There is no living witness. There is no box, Mr. Voss. She held his eyes. They will say I wrote it myself. Harlan opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Because she was right. Rufus Kane looked at the head of the chimney. At the cut hemp curled in the grass. At the 500 feet of morning air below it. Then we bring the box up. Elias Ward was already moving toward the pack mule. What that boy had loaded into the crate. Without being asked. Before dawn. On the strength of a rumor about a rope. Was 200 feet of New Manila. A set of blocks off the freight rig that had not turned since the line quit running. A pair of ash poles. 4 iron pins. A maul. A keg of grease. Mr. Kane said take what she will need. Elias did not look up from unlashing it. Did not say what for. Delia Marsh put her son's coat on him. Dry now. Buttoned it to the throat. Then she walked up to Aloan. With the specific expression of a woman who has decided something. I can hold a rope. You have got a boy. I have got a boy who watched a stranger give away her only blanket last night. Delia's chin was steady. He will sit where you put him. I will take a turn on the line. The 4 of them worked that rim until the sun stood high. Rufus set the rig. Because Rufus had loaded freight down grades since he was old enough to hold a rope, and knew things about mechanical advantage that no schooling teaches. He had them drive the ash poles into a crack 6 feet back from the lip. Then crosswise, greased at the bearing, so the line would run over timber instead of sawing itself in half on granite. He set the blocks in a double purchase. He walked the mule line twice, checking the angle of pull. Elias worked the mules. Harlan, who had never done a day of physical labor in his life, took a hold on the tail rope, blistered both hands inside 20 minutes, wrapped them in his own necktie, took hold again. Aloan went down the chimney at 11 in the morning, with a fresh line around her waist. She came onto the ledge in full daylight this time. The overhang held its shadow, but light came off the far wall now, thrown back sideways, so that for the first time in 38 years, the wagon lay in something like day. She rigged the box, the way Rufus had shown her on the rim, with a length of rope in the dirt, a bridle of 3 parts around the iron bands, seized at the crown, so the pull would come off the courses instead of the wood. She cleared the scree from around it. With her hands, she braced her boots against the frame ribs, put her back into it. Felt 38 years of wedged granite grit give. A quarter inch, then an inch, then let go all at once, so that the box came free. With a groan she felt through her spine. She called up. The line went taut. The blocks took the weight. For the first time in 38 years, the strongbox lifted off the ledge. It went up the wall in a slow half-turn, scraping, swinging, catching the light on its iron. 400 pounds of a town's oldest lie, rising through the air on New Manila. By the time Aloan hauled herself over the lip on the second line, the whole of Dry Creek Hollow was standing on that rim. They had come up the trace all afternoon in 2s and 3s, on horses, on foot, in a wagon. The freighter, the woman who had stopped sweeping, the 2 boys off the hitching rail, Merritt Beale, with her sleeves still pushed up, men from the saloon porch. Word had gotten down the mountain sometime past noon, and this time, nobody had needed to be told twice. They stood well back in a wide crescent, silent, watching a box come up out of a hole in the ground that half of them had been personally certain was empty. Nobody laughed. The sun was going amber when the strongbox came over the edge, dragged the last 4 feet on its side across bare granite, then settled, dripping, banded in iron, its lock plate the size of a girl's palm still fastened. 400 people had believed a thing about a man for 38 years. On no evidence. Out of habit. Because it cost them nothing. It sat there in front of every one of them. Shut. Weston Crane was at the back of the crowd. He had ridden up sometime during the haul. Nobody had seen him arrive. He stood, with his hat in his hands. They brought it down the mountain the next morning, on the freight wagon, with Rufus driving, at a walking pace, the whole town coming behind. They set it on the steps of the bank, in front of the stone face, because Harlan Boss had said it would be opened in daylight, where people could see it, or it would not be opened at all. Thaddeus Ainsworth came out onto the top step, in his black waistcoat, with his gold chain across his belly. He looked at the box. He looked at the 200 people in the street. He understood that there was no version of the next hour that he controlled. "This is bank property. It will be inventoried inside, by the officers of the... It will be inventoried where it sits." Harlan Boss had a smith's chisel in his hand. He struck the lock off in 4 blows. The hasp gave. The lid came up on hinges that had not moved since a careful man closed it. On the 15th of October 1847, the silver was inside. Coin dollars, and canvas sacks gone gray. The fabric rotted at the fold, so that when the first sack shifted, the coins came through the bottom of it, in a bright hard rush, across the stone step. And 200 people in the street of Dry Creek Hollow made a sound. that had no word in it. Harlan counted it. On the steps. It took 2 hours. He counted it out loud. In sacks. In hundreds. With the freighter and Merritt Beale standing as witnesses. Because he asked for 2 and got 40. When he had the figure, he took out the bill of lading. He read the net weight. In the driver's plain upright hand. The count on the steps matched it. Then he sent Elias Ward inside for the brown calf ledger. Opened it to October of 1847. Turned it around, so the front row could see. Put his finger under the entry for the consignment. The bank's book said more. The gap between those 2 numbers stood in the street. In the open air. For the first time in 38 years. The wagon left with what the driver signed for. Harlan's voice carried. Up the whole length of that street. The house recorded what it was told it had sent. A beat. The difference never went over that rim. He looked at Ainsworth. The difference never left this town. Thaddeus Ainsworth had gone the color of the ledger paper. That entry predates my tenure by 19 years. Whatever Nathaniel Crane. It predates your tenure. Harlan did not raise his voice at all, which made it worse. It does not predate your key. Silence. That original book has been in your private box since I brought it to you in '68, when I asked you whether a 30% variance in a single consignment ought to be reported to the county. He paused. You told me the matter was settled. He closed the ledger. You told me it was settled. Every time I asked? Thaddeus. For 17 years. There is a silence a crowd makes when it turns. The county men came up from the valley 11 days later. Ainsworth did not last that long. The directors met on the Thursday. Took the keys off him on the Thursday. Put Harlan Voss behind the oak desk on the Friday morning. Nathaniel Crane had been dead since 1871. There is no court in this country that can be convened against a man in a grave. What could be done was done. The county recorder entered a finding against the 1847 consignment record, struck the accusation off, wrote a single line into the margin of a book that had been long since before the Hollow had a schoolhouse. Weston Crane came to the livery on the second evening. He came alone, on foot, hat off. Before he cleared the door, into the dim, where Aloan was rubbing liniment into the bay ponies off hind, with Elias holding the halter. She kept working. She did not stop for him. I want to say a thing. Badly. He turned the hat in his hands. I am going to say it. Badly. Then say it. I did not know. Aloan straightened, rag in hand. He wet his lips. My grandfather died in '71. I was 34. He left me the valley entire. Timber. Water. The north face. All of it. He took a breath, along with a will that had one line in it I have read maybe 400 times. His jaw moved. Never let a man down into Widow Gorge. Not for any price. A beat. No explanation. Nothing else about it anywhere in his papers. So I surveyed it. Twice. '79 and '83. At my own cost. And I would have done it a third time this spring. He gave a laugh that had nothing in it. I thought it was 14 years. I have been sure. There was a vein down that cut that the old man found and sat on, that a HALE deed was sitting on top of, that someday a HALE would come back for. He paused. I thought I was protecting an inheritance. You were. Aloan said it flat. Just not the one you thought. He took that. When you walked past me, in that rain. His voice came apart slightly at the edges, then reassembled. I would have bought you at 80. I would have gone to 400. I sat my horse there, working out what number would move you. He looked at the ground, and you did not hear the offer. You had already gone. He shifted the hat. I sent Grady back for the rope. After midnight. That is mine, not his. He would not have thought of it. Elias's hand tightened on the halter. I have told the county men the same. In writing. This morning. Weston put the hat back on his head. Took it off again. It will cost me. I find. I do not care about that. As much as I expected to. Eloin looked at him. A long moment. She was about to speak. He held up a hand. There is one more thing. He reached inside his coat. He brought out a letter. Folded in fours. The paper yellowed at the folds. The ink on the outside faded. But her name was on it. Not Eloin. HALE. Just HALE. This was in my grandmother's things. When she died, my mother kept it in a drawer. For 29 years. I found it when I went back to the house. The evening you brought that box down. His hand trembled once. He steadied it. She never gave it to anybody. She never had a chance. He held it out. Eloin took it. She wiped her fingers on her apron. She unfolded it. Slowly. In the last of the light coming through the barn door. The hand was a woman's. Careful. Slightly slanted. Learned from a copybook a long time ago. The date was July 1856. Nathaniel. I cannot go on the way we have gone on. I have kept your house for 22 years. I have raised your son. I have sat at your table with the wives of men whose credit you called. I have said nothing when you told the story of the HALE boy in the valley the way you told it. And I have said nothing when you told it in your own front room, which is the version I know is true. I know what you did. I have known it since the spring of '48 when you came home from the HALE place and put your boots in the mudroom and would not look at me for 3 days. I know that Ellery HALE never took $1 from that consignment. I know that you did. I know that Jonah HALE is a good man, and that his mother is dying, and that you have driven them out, not to protect our name, but to keep yours from being asked about. I am writing this because I cannot say it to you, and I cannot sleep with it any longer. If I am gone before this thing is set right, I want somebody to know that I knew, that I sat here, and I ate your bread, and I raised your son, and that I knew. I will not send this while you live. I do not know if I will send it after, but I want it. Somewhere, where a HALE might one day read it. If God spares one to us. Ada Crane. Eloin stood in the doorway of the barn, with a 29-year-old letter in her hands. For a long time she did not move. Then she folded it. Once. Twice. Along its own creases. And she held it against her coat. In the same place where her grandfather's letter had been the whole time. 2 letters. Written 30 years apart. By people who had never met. Both of them saying the same thing in the same silence. I know. Eloin closed her eyes. She said one word. She did not know she said it out loud. Grandma. Not her grandmother. His. Weston Crane. 51 years old. Standing in a livery in a town he owned most of. With his hat in both hands. Started to cry. Silent. The way men that age cry when they have not been given the practice. Eloin did not go to him. She stood where she was. And she let him have it. Because 29 years is a long time. To carry a letter you did not know you were carrying. From a woman who had loved you when you were a boy. And who had been forced. By the same man who taught you how to shake hands. To swallow the truth she wanted to leave you. When his breath came back, she stepped forward. She put out her hand. He looked at it. "Your grandmother and my grandfather were both locked in another man's oath," she said it steady. "We are not going to be anymore." He took her hand. The bank paid a salvage award. Harlan Voss computed it at the desk, with the directors sitting around him, and a copy of the state code open at his elbow. A fixed percentage on recovered property. The same rate the house had paid a freight outfit in '78 for a strongbox pulled out of a flooded Ford. Entered in the book. Precedent. It came to more than a year of a schoolteacher's wages. It came to more than Weston Crane's second offer would have. Aloan took it, standing at the counter, folded it into her coat, then turned around, and gave a portion of it back across the same counter. Before she had walked 5 steps, entered in the name of Ellery HALE, driver. The church roof had been leaking since the winter of 1849. It had been patched 11 times, with whatever was to hand. The schoolhouse had 31 children in it that autumn, learning their letters off one shared primer, with the cover gone. Weston Crane paid for the first stone of that roof himself. Out of his own pocket, without announcing it, Merritt Beale found out from the freighter, and told the entire county inside 2 days, which was the closest thing to a punishment anybody ever handed him. He came to the raising. He and Aloan did not speak. He nodded once across the churchyard. She returned it. That was the whole of the settlement between those two families. 38 years after the fact. Conducted in silence. In front of a stack of shingles. She kept the deed. Everybody assumed she would sell it. Now that there was nothing on that rim. The box was up. The name was clean. The road east was open. She had money in her coat for the first time in her life. She rode up on the last warm Sunday of October. Walked the line she had cut. Sat with her palm in the cup worn into the granite slab. Then came back down that evening to the livery. Went in through the wide door. Found the old man on his barrel. The stall and back standing empty. Since the line quit, Rufus Kane did not look up from his leather. "Been empty 11 years, Elias says. You have a HALE contract nobody signed. Since '83. Because there is nobody left here to sign it." Elias talks more than he lets on. "She stood in the middle of the floor, with her hands at her sides. I can shoe. I can drive. I can hold a book straight enough for Mr. Voss to stop looking at it. A beat. I have got a portion left. I would put it into this barn, if there is a man in it who wants a partner." The rag stopped moving. Rufus Kane sat there, in his square of dust, with 68 years in his shoulders, in a building he had come to every morning, in order to have somewhere to sit, with a thing he could not say. "Your great-grandfather kept my father alive by sending him away," he told the leather. "I had about decided that was the last useful thing anybody in that family would ever get to do for anybody in mine." He raised his eyes. "Then it is not." Delia Marsh took a room over the store. She had been on her way to a cousin in the valley. The cousin had died in September. Word had gotten to her a week after she started walking. She had not known where to go next. Merritt Beale needed help behind the counter. Wren needed a school. Aloan needed a friend who was not a horse. The 3 things arrived in the same week and settled themselves without anybody planning it, the way certain things do when there is finally room for them. Wren Marsh took to Aloan the way a child takes to the first person who gives him a real job to do. He followed her to the livery every afternoon after his lessons. He learned the names of the horses. He learned to say a HALE name out loud without dropping his voice, which was the first thing he had never had to learn. They set the stone in the churchyard the first week of November. Not a grave. There was nothing to put in it, nothing to bring up, nothing anybody dug for. Aloan had said no to that plainly. The one time it was raised in front of the whole committee, in a voice that ended the discussion. A marker only. Granite. Cut by a man in the valley. Set inside the leaning iron fence. On the row, where the 1847 stone stood. Ellery HALE. Driver. He kept his word. The pocket watch went on the base of it, laid flat on the ledge of the stone, where anybody passing could see the engraving on the back. Brass gone black-green. Hand stopped at 20 minutes past 4. It was still there in the spring. It was still there years after. In a town where a name had once been an insult you could hand a child. Nobody ever touched it. Half of Dry Creek Hollow came out for the setting. Hats off. In a wind that had turned cold for good, Delia Marsh stood at the back, with her pony sound again, having decided somewhere in that week not to travel any further. Wren stood in front of her, holding the lantern he had not once been asked to give back. Nobody made a speech. Merritt Beale had wanted one. Harlan Voss had been asked to give it, having become, without any of his own doing, the town's official voice for matters of record. He got as far as the front, looked at the stone, took his spectacles off, put them back on. I balanced that book every quarter for 36 years, knowing there was a number in it that had a man's name under it. Romley. His voice was not made for open air. It carried anyway. I wanted, said out loud, once, in front of everybody, that being careful is not the same as being honest. A beat. It took a stranger with no money to teach me that. At 58 years of age. He nodded once. Amen. That was the whole of it. The last of the light that evening was the color of a peach skin. She rode up to the rim alone, one final time, before the snow closed the trace. Willow went at her own pace on the climb. At the shoulder, where the timber let go of the sky, she stopped, without being asked, though this time there was nothing at all to stop for. The widow fir stood where it had stood, since before any of it. Black. Split. The ironwood still sunk in the char at chest height, holding its old mark. Nobody would ever take that tree down. Rufus had bought the stumpage on that shoulder. A fourth time. In October. Out of the hay money. Then put the paper in Aloan's hand across the barrel, without a word. Which was how he said most things. She let the reins go slack. Walked out to the lip. Stood with her toes 18 inches from 500 feet of air. Below. The creek had come up with the rain, turning silver, then amber, then a deep hard blue as the sun went off the western ridge. Boots on the granite behind her. Unhurried. Rufus Kane came up on her shoulder, hat in his hand, for reasons neither of them mentioned, looking down into the cut, where his father's story had ended, where somebody else's had lasted 38 years. Past the man who lived it. He let a good while go by before he asked, "What did you come away with? In the end?" "All of it. The whole 4 days." Aloan watched the water lose the last of its color. "A name." Her voice went out over the gorge. Quiet, without any weight on it at all, because the thing was finally too settled to need any. "That is all. A beat. And a name is enough to live the rest of a life on." Willow came up behind them, blew once, then stood with them at the edge of the world. 3 of them on the rim of a gorge that had held a family's silence for 38 years. An old man who had kept a tree, a horse who had held a rope, a young woman who had ridden into a town with 12 cents, one letter, one animal, and walked out of a bank with a piece of paper everybody in the county had already agreed was worthless. She had been given the deed to 500 feet of nothing. She had gone down into it alone, on borrowed rope, with nothing to eat. What she brought back up was worth more than the silver, though it took the whole town standing on that rim at sunset